There is a town in Pennsylvania where, for about 20 years, people simply didn't die the way Americans were supposed to. No heart attacks before 65, almost no suicide, no crime, no ulcers. Researchers came from across the country to study them. They checked the water, they checked the genes, they checked the food. None of it explained anything. The answer they eventually found wasn't in any lab, and the moment the town lost it, the dying started. This is the Roseto effect. And it might be the most important thing medicine has ever discovered, and then quietly decided to ignore. In 1882, a group of immigrants left a small village in southern Italy called Roseto Valfortore. They were poor. They spoke no English. They had almost nothing. They settled in the hills of eastern Pennsylvania and named their town after the place they left behind. By 1900, Roseto, Pennsylvania was a working town. The men worked the slate quarries in brutal conditions. The women worked textile mills. The houses were small. The streets were narrow. They planted fig trees in their yards because fig trees reminded them of home. They ate the food they had always eaten, not the lean, careful diet that American doctors would later recommend. They cooked with lard. They ate salami and hard cheeses. They drank wine with dinner every night. They smoked. On paper, these people should have been dying. They weren't. In 1961, a physician named Stuart Wolfe was visiting a colleague in the area when a local doctor mentioned something in passing. In nearly 30 years of practice, he had almost never treated a man under 65 for a heart attack. Wolfe asked to see the death records. What he found stopped him cold. In the rest of America at that time, heart disease was killing men at a rate that terrified the entire medical establishment. It was the #1 cause of death. Doctors were desperate to understand it. The entire country was being told to eat less fat, exercise more, stress less. In Roseto, the death rate from heart disease was roughly half the national average. Men over 65 were dying at half the rate of the surrounding towns. There was almost no suicide, almost no crime. Peptic ulcers were nearly non-existent. Wolfe called his friend John Brune, a sociologist at the University of Oklahoma. He told him, "Something is happening in this town. We need to figure out what." They spent the next several years looking for the answer in all the places medicine told them to look. The water supply was identical to neighboring towns. The genes were unremarkable. When researchers traced Rosetan immigrants who had moved to other American cities and adopted American lifestyles, their heart disease rates climbed to match everyone else's. Same bloodlines, different outcome. The diet was, by every measure, terrible. Fat made up nearly 41% of their calories. They were not exercising in any structured way. None of the standard explanations worked. So Wolfe and Brune started looking at something else. They started watching how the people of Roseto actually lived. What they saw was unlike anything they had documented in an American town. Multi-generational households were the norm. Grandparents didn't live in retirement communities. They lived in the house, at the table, at the center of things. There were 22 separate civic organizations in a town of just 2,000 people. Clubs, churches, mutual aid societies. Structures that existed for no other reason than to pull people together. When a family did well financially, they didn't display it. Showing off wealth was actively discouraged by the community. If you got rich, you were expected to act like you hadn't. The pressure ran in the opposite direction from everywhere else in America, and the streets. Researchers noted that people were constantly stopping to talk, not quick nods, real conversations. Neighbors cooking for neighbors, old men sitting on porches, people stopping at each other's doors. Wolfe and Brune published their findings in 1964. Their conclusion was simple and devastating. The people of Roseto were protected by each other, not by their diet, not by their genes, not by their water or their doctors or their habits, by the fact that they were genuinely structurally embedded in each other's lives. The medical establishment did not know what to do with this, because here is what it meant. It meant that the most powerful predictor of whether you would die of a heart attack was not what you ate. It was not how much you exercised. It was not your cholesterol number or your blood pressure reading. It was whether anyone would notice if you didn't come home. Wolfe and Brune had identified something that had no pharmaceutical solution, no supplement, no intervention a doctor could bill for. You cannot prescribe community. You cannot package belonging and sell it at a pharmacy. And so the findings sat, cited occasionally, referenced in sociology papers, but never becoming the center of anything, never changing how medicine was practiced or how public health policy was written. The research stayed on the shelf. And in Roseto, slowly, something began to change. By the late 1960s, the children of the original immigrants were growing up, and they were growing up American. They moved out of the family home. They built bigger houses on the edge of town. houses with more space between them and their neighbors. They joined country clubs instead of the old civic organizations. They stopped eating dinner together every night. They stopped stopping to talk. Wolf and Brune had predicted exactly this. In 1964, they told anyone who would listen, if Roseto loses its social structure, the protection will disappear. Nobody acted on it. By 1971, the first Rosetan under 45 died of a heart attack. By the 1980s, Roseto's heart disease rate had risen to match every surrounding town. The experiment had ended. Not because the water changed, not because the genes mutated, not because they started eating worse food. If anything, the younger generation ate better by every standard measure. They lost the one thing that had actually been keeping them alive. And they lost it the same way most of the developed world has been losing it for the past 50 years. One moved household at a time, one dissolved tradition at a time, one replaced conversation at a time. Right now, loneliness is at levels that researchers describe as epidemic. In 2023, the United States Surgeon General issued a formal advisory declaring loneliness a public health crisis, not a personal failing, a crisis, with measurable consequences for physical health equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 15 cigarettes. Chronic loneliness raises your risk of heart disease by 29%, stroke by 32%. It accelerates cognitive decline. It shortens life in ways that show up clearly in the data and almost never in the conversation. The people of Roseto were not doing anything mystical. They were not following a program. They had simply never stopped doing what humans had done for hundreds of thousands of years before them. They ate together. They argued together. They buried each other and showed up at each other's doors. They knew that the person next to them was going to be there tomorrow. Your body, the same body that ran from predators and slept around fires and fed the sick and grieved the dead. That body does not function correctly in isolation. It was never designed to. It reads loneliness the same way it reads physical danger. The same stress hormones. The same inflammatory response. The same slow damage accumulating in the dark. You are not built to optimize. You are not built to perform. You are not built to manage your personal brand, or your morning routine, or your 5-year plan in a room by yourself. You are built to be known by a small number of people who would notice if you were gone. The town of Roseto, Pennsylvania still exists. You can drive there today. The quarries are closed. The textile mills are gone. The fig trees are mostly gone too. It looks like everywhere else now. And for 20 years in the middle of the last century, before it learned to look like everywhere else, it had accidentally solved something that billions of dollars of medical research still hasn't. The answer was never in a pill. It was always in the house next door.